Can you imagine a morning so perfect it feels like the world is holding its breath? The sun peeked over Charleston's historic rooftops, casting a warm, amber glow across cobblestone streets that whispered stories of old. Oh, how the air danced with a gentle breeze, carrying the sweet scent of magnolia blossoms and the comforting aroma of fresh-brewed coffee from cozy corner cafes. It was the kind of spring morning that made everything feel peaceful, timeless, as if the world had always been this serene. But beneath that calm, Charleston cradled quiet stories, waiting to erupt into something unforgettable. Clarice Monroe stepped onto the brick sidewalk with a purpose that radiated strength. Her footsteps were light yet deliberate, each one a testament to a woman who knew exactly how to carry herself, no matter the room or the eyes upon her. At 57, Clarice wasn't just graceful, she embodied a quiet dignity that only a lifetime of resilience could forge. Her salt and pepper curls were styled neatly above her shoulders, framing her face like a crown, while delicate pearl earrings peeked out, catching the morning light. She wore a tailored cream blouse, tucked elegantly into wide-legged linen trousers, her low-heeled shoes clicking softly with every step. Around her neck hung a vintage pearl necklace, its subtle shimmer undeniably real, a cherished gift from her husband, Lionel, given on their 20th anniversary. She wore it every year on this day, a tradition as steadfast as her love. Today was no different, or so she thought. Fresh from a small family-run bookstore nestled between a florist's vibrant blooms and an art gallery's quiet allure, Clarice held a neatly wrapped package tied with a blue ribbon. Inside, a rare first edition of James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time, a surprise for Lionel, a gift wrapped in thoughtfulness. Charleston's downtown streets pulsed with their usual rhythm. Young couples strolled hand in hand, shopkeepers swept their storefronts with care, and older residents shared stories on shaded benches. Clarice passed them all with a polite smile, warm but reserved, never fully inviting conversation yet never shutting out the world. This city was her home, woven into her very being. She'd grown up here, witnessed decades of change and struggle, and though she sometimes wondered if it had truly evolved, her belief in Charleston's soul burned bright. How could it not, with its history and heart? But then, half a block away, a patrol car idled. To most, it was just part of the scenery, but Clarice caught it in the corner of her eye. Did she flinch? Not a chance. Did she slow her stride or change her path? Absolutely not. Why should she? These were her streets, her neighborhood. She belonged here more than the officers in that cruiser ever could. She clutched her package lightly in one hand, the other slipping into her pocket, brushing against the smooth edge of her phone. Just in case. The cruiser didn't move, but oh, how she felt the weight of its gaze. It wasn't new, this feeling. Even after all these years, even as the wife of the city's police chief, there were moments when her skin spoke louder than her voice, when respect seemed to vanish in the face of prejudice. But today? She pushed that thought aside, refusing to let it dim her light. Crossing the next intersection with ease, her posture tall and her face composed, Clarice had no inkling that her peaceful walk was about to ignite a public storm. How could she know that the eyes watching her from that patrol car weren't just curious but suspicious? That she, Clarice Monroe, community leader, daughter of Charleston, wife of Police Chief Lionel Monroe, was moments away from being treated like a criminal in the very city she'd pour her life into building? For now the sun climbed higher, and Clarice kept walking, proud, graceful, blissfully unaware of the confrontation brewing just around the corner. At the corner of King and Broad, Officer Brett Strickland leaned against his cruiser, one hand gripping a lukewarm cup of gas station coffee, the other resting ominously near his holster. His shift had been painfully slow, too slow, and boredom gnawed at him, making his temper itch like an unrelenting rash. The morning had offered nothing but mundane noise complaints, a handful of traffic calls, and a petty dispute at a hardware store. Hardly the adrenaline-fueled action he'd envisioned when he joined the Charleston Police Department a decade ago. Strickland scanned the street with a predator's patience, his eyes flicking between passers-by, some chatting on phones, others hurrying to work or strolling leisurely with their dogs. Then, his gaze locked onto her. A black woman, mid-50s, dressed with a sophistication that outshone everyone else on the block. Her posture screamed confidence, a calm composure that for some reason set his nerves on edge. She wasn't rushing, wasn't trying to blend in. Her hair was flawless, her clothes immaculate, and that necklace, those pearls gleamed in the sunlight like they didn't belong. That was it, wasn't it? Not the woman herself, but the way she wore those pearls, as if they were hers, as if she was someone. And maybe she was, but to Strickland, something about it felt wrong. Why? He couldn't say, but it gnawed at him. She didn't even glance his way as she passed. That stung more than anything. Most people looked at him, out of fear, curiosity, respect, or just instinct when they saw the uniform. But this woman? Nothing. Like he was invisible. He took a slow sip of his coffee, watching her glide down the sidewalk. Then, without much thought, he tossed the cup onto the cruiser's floorboard and stepped out. His boots hit the ground with a deliberate thud, as if he wanted her to feel his approach before she heard it. "Hey!" he called out, his voice slicing through the morning's gentle hum. The woman stopped mid-step and turned, her face a mask of calm, no fear, no surprise, just a flicker of annoyance in her steady gaze. "Yes, officer?" she asked, her tone even but firm. Strickland closed the distance between them, his eyes zeroing in on the package in her hand before shifting to the pearl necklace resting just above her collarbone. "That necklace," he said, jerking his chin toward it. "Where'd you get it?" Her brows lifted slightly, but her voice stayed steady. "It was a gift from my husband." He ignored her, staring harder. "Looks expensive." "It is," she replied, unapologetic.
Stricklandes Eisnerode. You sur it's your.
A few pedestrians slowed, sensing the tension. One woman, standing under a bakery's awning, subtly pulled out her phone. "Yes," the woman said, "I'm sure." Strickland folded his arms, his voice turning icy. "We had a report of a woman matching your description earlier this morning, shoplifting from one of the jewelry stores downtown." Clarice didn't blink. "I just left a bookstore. I don't shoplift, officer." Her words were clear, unshaken. "Mind showing me some ID?" he pressed, his voice tight with challenge. "Do you have a reason to suspect I've committed a crime?" she countered, her tone measured but unyielding. "I just told you, you match a description," he said, planting his feet firmly. "It's procedure." "It's harassment," she shot back, her voice firm yet controlled.
Ive done nothing wrong. Oh, how the air grey vi.
More pedestrians stopped, some pretending not to stare, others openly recording. Strickland saw the phones but didn't budge. Something about this woman burrowed under his skin, and retreating now, in front of an audience? Unthinkable. "You don't look like someone who'd just be strolling through here with pearls and a rare book," he said, nodding toward her package. "You understand why I'd be concerned." "No," she said, her voice sharpening, "I don't understand. But I've learned not to expect understanding from people like you." Strickland's jaw clenched. "People like me," he repeated, his tone laced with indignation. She met his gaze head-on. "The kind of people who see skin color before character." His hand twitched toward his radio. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to cooperate." "And I'm going to need you to justify why I should," she responded, standing her ground. "If you don't have cause, then I suggest you let me be."
The sidewalk transformed into a stage, the morninges calme chattered.
Voices rose, and a low murmur rippled through the crowd as whispers turned to questions.
What is going on?
She didn't do anything. Why is he bothering her?
Strickland's tout allé, d'espérat tout reclin contrôle.
You think you're above the law, he snapped, his voice cutting like a blade. Clarice didn't flinch. "No, but I do think I have the right to walk down a street in the city I've lived in my whole life without being interrogated for existing." That was it, the moment everything shifted. The crowd leaned in, their energy palpable. Strickland felt it, oh how he felt it, his authority slipping through his fingers like sand. He was losing control, and he knew it. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly imagine, was who this woman truly was. Clarice sensed the change, not just in the tension between her and Officer Strickland, but in the very air of the street. What had started as an ordinary morning, a walk, a thoughtful gift, a breath of fresh air, had spiraled into something else entirely. Now she stood still, the center of a growing circle of eyes and whispered concerns. Strickland's posture had stiffened, his tone shifting from curt to condescending. He loomed too close, clearly trying to make his presence feel larger, more intimidating. His hand hovered near his belt, not on his weapon, not yet, but close enough to send a chilling message. "I'm not going to ask again," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Show me some ID." Clarice didn't back down. "And I'm not going to surrender my rights just because you've decided I don't look like I belong. I'm not required to show ID without reasonable suspicion, and you haven't given me any." He stepped closer, now mere inches away. You're refusing a lawful order, is that what I'm hearing? You're giving an unlawful one, she answered coolly, her composure unshaken. And yes, I'm refusing to participate in your performance. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, emboldened by her poise. Phones rose higher, capturing every second. A young man near the corner whispered, "She's not backing down." An elderly woman by a flower cart shook her head, muttering, "When will this end?" Strickland glanced at the onlookers, then back at Clarice. He was used to bending people with intimidation, but this woman? She wasn't budging, wasn't letting him control the narrative.
Mam, am giving you a final warning.
She tilted her head slightly, her eyes piercing. Or what? He froze. That question, asterisk or what? Asterisk, caught him off guard. In his mind, this should have been over by now. A quick flash of ID, a few stern words, and she'd be on her way. Instead, she'd drawn a line in the sand, and with every passing second, that line grew bolder, brighter. "Don't make this harder than it has to be," he growled through gritted teeth. Clarice's lips curved into a faint smile, not of amusement, but of clarity, of unshakable resolve. "It's already harder than it should be. You made it that way the moment you stopped me." Her words struck like a spark, igniting something in the crowd. Strickland's jaw tightened, his eyes flicking to her necklace again.
Tell me what's tort, c'est le pire like d'être around here.
You sure you didn't just walk out with it? There it was, no more pretense, no more vague suspicions.
À directe accusation, les barrer fort all to hear.
I'm sure, she said, her voice steady as steel. You, however, seem unsure of your own professionalism.
A gasp rippled through the crowd.
She's not playing, a young voice whispered. Another called out, accusing her of theft over pearls? This isn't 1955. Strickland whirled toward the speaker, his face flushing red. Back off, he barked. This is an active police investigation. You mean public harassment? Someone shot back.
Escalating for no reason.
Clarice stood unmoved, her chin lifted, her pulse racing but her face betraying nothing. She knew now that this wasn't just about her, it was about principle, about every moment like this that had come before. Standing her ground was no longer a choice, it was a necessity.
I'm done talking, Strickland snarled.
If you don't show me ID right now, you'll be detained for further questioning. Clarice slowly set her package on a nearby bench, folding her arms with deliberate calm. Then do what you think you need to do, she said, her voice carrying a weight that silenced the crowd. But understand this, you're not detaining me because of anything I've done. You're detaining me because of who I am. He reached for his radio, but a sharp voice cut through the tension.
She's right.
A man in a crisp blazer stepped forward, his face etched with anger. I've been here the whole time. She hasn't done a thing, and if you touch her without cause, this is going viral.
Stay out of this. Strickland snapped.
You're being filmed from every angle, the man retorted. This looks like abuse of power, and you know it.
Strickland's eyes darted around.
Phones were everywhere now, some live streaming, capturing his every move. A young woman across the street shouted, Facebook's blowing up. Hundreds are watching.
Clarice watched as Strickland's face flickered, enjeu, uncertainty, pride, fear.
His world was cracking, and he could feel it. The weight of his uniform, once a shield, was now a spotlight, exposing him to the judgment of the crowd. What would he do next? His next move could define not just this moment, but his entire career.
You think you're something special, émuttered, turning back to Clarice.
I think I'm someone who knows her rights, she replied, her voice unwavering. And you don't get to strip them from me just because you're uncomfortable.
A heavy silence fell.
Strickland opened his mouth, but before he could speak, a siren blipped, a sharp, short chirp.
Another cruiser pulled up.
A female officer in her 40s stepped out, her expression unreadable as she took in the scene.
The crowd parted slightly, making way.
Everything okay here, Brett? She asked, her voice cool but pointed. Strickland turned, caught off guard. Just questioning a suspicious individual. She glanced at Clarice, then at the crowd, their phones raised like a sea of eyes. Doesn't look like it's going well, she said quietly. Maybe we cool this down. I've got it under control, Strickland snapped. Doesn't look that way, she replied, her tone sharp.
We don't need a viral mess today.
Clarice exhaled slowly, not in relief but in readiness. The fire within her burned brighter, undimmed. Strickland's fists clenched, his lips a thin line. He hadn't broken her, hadn't forced her into silence or fear, and it infuriated him. But the real storm? Oh, it was just beginning. Because in moments, everything he thought he knew, about power, about identity, about authority, was about to be shattered by the last person he'd ever expect. And she was already on her way. The street's energy had transformed completely. What started as a quiet confrontation had exploded into a spectacle, drawing the neighborhood's full attention. Phones were everywhere. People leaned out of storefronts, stepped off porches, gathered on sidewalks, watching, recording, whispering. This was no longer just one officer and one woman. It was a line in the sand, a moment that demanded to be seen. Clarice stood at its heart, unwavering, her back straight, her chin high. She didn't plead, didn't panic. She didn't need to. The crowd spoke for her now, their voices rising in her defense. "This is outrageous," someone shouted. "She hasn't done a thing. He's just mad she's not scared." A young man, maybe in his 20s, live-streamed the scene, his voice urgent. "This woman's being harassed on King Street for nothing. She's holding a book and wearing pearls, and that's enough for a badge and a threat." Clarice heard the words but kept her eyes forward, her heartbeat steady, not from fearlessness, but from years of navigating moments like this. This wasn't her first brush with being questioned for simply existing, and it might not be her last. But here now, in broad daylight with so many witnesses, this was different. Strickland was unraveling, his hand twitching near his hip, betraying his tension. The crowd's defiance rattled him, his training, his experience, all seemed to crumble under the weight of public scrutiny. "Back up," he shouted, spinning to face the growing crowd. "This is a police matter." But the people weren't backing down, not today, not now. "Do your job right," a woman in a nursing uniform called out. "We pay your salary. You don't get to harass someone for walking while black." Applause erupted, bold and unyielding. Strickland's face burned red, his jaw tight. His authority was slipping, and he knew it. Turning back to Clarice, he tried to regain control. "You've got 5 seconds to comply," he said, his voice low and dangerous.
I'm not playing.
"Neither am I," she replied, her calm like a blade. "And I won't pretend I don't know what this is. You didn't stop me because of a report. You stopped me because of how I look, because I didn't bow when I saw your badge." The crowd murmured in agreement. A woman with a toddler stepped forward. "She's speaking for us all." Strickland's radio crackled. He ignored it. He was in too deep to back out now, committed to a path that was costing him everything he thought to find his power.
Clarice pressait donc, her voice steady.
"You keep asking me to prove who I am, but the question isn't who I am. It's who you are, and what kind of man feels threatened by a woman holding a book." A few laughed, not in humor, but in awe of the truth's absurdity. "You're on live stream," a voice shouted. "Thousands are watching. You sure about this?" Strickland flinched, his eyes darting to the phones, to the faces watching, waiting. Would he fold? Would he explode? "Keep recording," someone yelled.
Let the world see. Clarice stood firm, her silence loudé d'inward.
She was done defending herself. Now, the burden was on him to justify this. Strickland stepped back, just half a foot, and for a moment, it seemed he might retreat. But pride, heat, and the cameras held him fast. "All right," he barked.
You want to play game?
"We'll take it downtown." He reached for her wrist.
No. Multiple voices criaient out.
A woman darted forward, placing herself between them.
Don't touch her. You've got no right.
Clarice didn't move. "Go ahead," she said, her voice cold and resolute. "Arrest me in front of everyone. Then see what happens." Strickland froze, his hand inches from her arm. The power had flipped completely, he felt it, and so did everyone else. One wrong move, and this wasn't just a viral video. It was a career ender, a scandal that would echo far beyond Charleston. "You're just doing your job, huh?" a man in a delivery uniform called out.
Nobody is doing that.
Strickland spun on him.
Stay out of it.
"I am in it," the man shot back. We all are. We've seen this too many times, someone in cuffs for nothing.
Clarisse's voice rose above the chaos, clear and imshakable.
You want to know who I am? Fine.
I'm Clarisse Monroe.
I've lived here longer than you've worn that badge. I'm a business owner, a volunteer, a mother, a wife. Strickland's face shifted, confusion, then dread.
She stepped closer, commanding the moment. My husband is Chief Lionel Monroe.
Silence fell, heavy and absolute. Strickland's mouth dropped open. He stepped back, his hand falling limp. Chief Monroe, he whispered, barely audible. Clarisse nodded. Yes. And he's probably watching this right now.
The silence shattered, gasp, mutter, a nervouloque from the back.
Oh, he's done, someone exclaimed. Clarisse stood poised, unshaken, her truth a thunderclap that changed everything.
Oh, can you feel the tension crackling in the air?
The crowd's murmurs swelled, their voices rising like a tide, emboldened by the sheer poise of Clarisse Monroe. Phones were hoisted higher, capturing every heartbeat of this unfolding drama. A young man near the corner leaned in, his voice a hushed awe. She's holding her ground. An elderly woman, her hands clutching a flower cart, shook her head with a weary sigh, muttering, It never ends, does it? When will it ever stop? Officer Brett Strickland's eyes darted to the onlookers, then snapped back to Clarisse. He was used to bending people with a glare, a barked command. But this woman? She wasn't flinching, not one bit. She wasn't letting him twist the narrative to suit his whims. Ma'am, I'm giving you a final warning, he said, his voice sharp with frustration. Clarisse tilted her head, just a fraction, her eyes gleaming with defiance. Or what? She asked, her words a challenge that hung in the air like a thunderclap.
Strickland froze.
Or what? That question hit him like a freight train. He hadn't expected it, hadn't prepared for it. In his mind, this should have been over by now, a quick flash of ID, a few stern words, and she'd scurry off chastened. But Clarisse? Oh, she'd drawn a line in the sand, and with every second he lingered, that line burned brighter, bolder, impossible to ignore. Don't make this harder than it has to be, he growled, his teeth gritted so tight you could almost hear them grind. Clarisse's lips curved into a faint smile, not amusement, but a piercing clarity that cut through his bravado. It's already harder than it should be, she said, her voice steady as a rock. You made it that way the moment you stopped me for no reason at all. Her words landed like a spark in dry grass, igniting something fierce in the crowd. Strickland's jaw tightened, his eyes flicking back to her pearl necklace, glinting softly in the morning sun. Tell me what store sells pearls like that around here, he snapped, pointing accusingly. You sure you didn't just walk out with it? There it was, no more pretense, no more dancing around with vague suspicions or procedural nonsense. A direct, ugly accusation laid bare for all to hear. I'm sure, Clarisse replied, her tone as calm as a still lake. You, however, seem unsure of your own professionalism. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, a wave of shock and admiration. Someone behind her, maybe a college student with wide eyes, whispered, She's not playing. Another voice, bolder, rang out, Are you seriously accusing this woman of theft because she's wearing pearls?
This is Charleston, not 1955. What is wrong with you?
Strickland whirled toward the speaker, his face flushing a deep, angry red. Back off, he barked, his voice cracking with the strain of his unraveling control. This is an active police investigation. You mean public harassment? Another voice shot back, sharp and unafraid. You're escalating this for no reason at all. Clarisse stood still, her chin lifted just a touch, her pulse thudding in her ears like a distant drum. But her face? Oh, it betrayed none of it. She knew now that this wasn't just about her. It was about the principal, the countless others who'd faced this same injustice. Standing her ground wasn't just a choice. It was a stand for something far bigger than herself. I'm done talking, Strickland growled, his voice low and dangerous. If you don't show me ID right now, you'll be detained for further questioning. Clarisse, with a deliberate calm that seemed to slow time itself, set the package in her hands down on a nearby bench, folding her arms with a quiet strength. Then do what you think you need to do, she said, her words carrying a weight that silenced the crowd. But understand this, you're not detaining me because of anything I've done. You're detaining me because of who I am. Oh, how those words echoed, a clarion call that struck at the heart of the moment. Strickland reached for his radio, his hand trembling with suppressed rage, but a sharp voice sliced through the tension like a blade.
She's right.
A man in a crisp blazer stepped forward, his face etched with righteous anger. Middle-aged, with a fire in his eyes, he looked ready to take on the world. "I've been standing here the whole time," he said, his voice booming. "She hasn't done a single thing wrong, and if you put your hands on her without cause, that's going straight to the press." "I suggest you stay out of this," Strickland warned, his tone laced with desperation. "I suggest you remember you're being filmed from every angle right now," the man snapped back, unflinching. "What you're doing looks a lot like abuse of power, and the whole world's watching." Strickland's eyes darted around, wild and unsteady. Nearly every person nearby had their phone up, some live streaming, their lenses capturing every second of his spiraling control. A young woman across the street shouted, her voice carrying over the crowd, "Facebook's already lighting up. Over 100 people are watching right now." Clarice watched as Strickland's face shifted, anger warring with uncertainty, pride clashing with a creeping fear. His world was cracking, splintering under the weight of public scrutiny. The uniform that once cloaked him in authority now felt like a spotlight, exposing his every flaw. What would he do next? His next move could decide not just his morning but his entire career. "You think you're something special," he muttered, turning back to Clarice, his voice dripping with resentment. "I think I'm someone who knows her rights," she replied, her words clear and unshaken. "And you don't get to strip them from me just because you're uncomfortable with who I am." A long, heavy silence fell, the air thick with anticipation. Strickland opened his mouth, ready to fire back, but before he could, a siren blipped behind him, a low, sharp chirp that cut through the tension like a knife. Another cruiser rolled up, its presence shifting the scene. From the passenger side stepped a female officer, in her 40s, her expression unreadable as she took in the chaos. The crowd parted slightly, making way for her, their eyes flicking between her and the unfolding drama. "Everything okay here, Brett?" she asked, her voice neutral but with a cool edge that hinted at disapproval. Strickland turned, clearly caught off guard, his composure fraying further. "Just questioning a suspicious individual," he said, trying to sound authoritative but failing miserably. The officer glanced at Clarice, then at the crowd, their phones raised like a forest of watchful eyes, their discontent growing louder. "Doesn't look like that's going over well," she said quietly, her words measured but pointed. "Maybe we need to cool this down." "I've got it under control," Strickland snapped, his voice betraying his panic. "Doesn't look that way to me," she replied, her tone clipped and unyielding.
We don't need a viral mess son hors en this morning.
Clarice let out a slow, steady breath, not of relief, but of readiness, like a warrior bracing for the next battle. The fire inside her hadn't dimmed. If anything, it burned brighter, fiercer, fueled by the moment's intensity. Strickland clenched his fists, his lips pressed into a thin, angry line. He hadn't broken her, hadn't forced her into silence or fear, and oh, how it gnawed at him. But what he didn't yet realize, what he couldn't possibly fathom, was that the real storm was still gathering, ready to unleash its full force. In mere minutes, everything he thought he knew about power, identity, and authority was about to be shattered by the last person he'd ever expect, and she was already on her way. The energy on the street had transformed completely, like a spark igniting a wildfire. What began as a quiet confrontation had exploded into a spectacle, drawing the full attention of the neighborhood. Phones were everywhere. People leaned out of storefronts, stepped down from porch stoops, gathered on sidewalks, their whispers turning to shouts. This wasn't just one officer and one woman anymore. It was a line in the sand, a moment that demanded to be witnessed. Clarice stood calmly at its heart, unwavering, her back straight, her chin held high like a beacon of strength. She didn't speak unless spoken to, didn't plead, didn't panic. Why would she? She didn't need to. The crowd was her voice now, their outrage and support echoing her stand. "This is ridiculous," someone shouted from behind her, their voice thick with indignation. "She hasn't done a damn thing. He's just mad she's not scared." Another voice joined in, a younger man, maybe in his 20s, his phone raised as he live-streamed the entire scene. "This woman's being harassed on King Street right now for nothing," he declared, his words urgent and raw. "She's got a package in her hand and a pearl necklace, and apparently that's enough to draw a badge and a threat? Are you kidding me?" Clarice heard the words, felt their weight, but kept her focus forward, her heartbeat steady now, not from a lack of fear, but from years of practice, of navigating moments where her very existence was questioned. This wasn't the first time she'd faced this kind of scrutiny, and it likely wouldn't be the last. But here, in broad daylight, with so many witnesses and a uniformed officer acting so brazenly? Oh, this was something new, something bold. Officer Strickland was coming apart at the seams. His hand hovered near his hip, a nervous twitch betraying the tension coiling in his shoulders. The crowd's defiance shook him to his core, his training, his experience, all of it crumbled under the relentless pressure of public accountability. "I'm telling you all to back up," he shouted, turning in a slow circle to face the growing throng, his voice desperate, almost pleading. "This is a police matter." But the people weren't backing down, not this time, not today. Their resolve was ironclad, their voices a chorus of resistance. "Then do your job with integrity," a woman in a nursing uniform called out, her words sharp and fearless. "We pay your salary. That doesn't give you the right to harass someone for walking while black." A wave of applause erupted, rolling through the crowd like thunder, bold and unapologetic. Strickland's face flushed a deeper red, his jaw clenched so tight it seemed it might snap. His authority was slipping, crumbling like sand through his fingers, and he knew it. He turned back to Clarice, desperation in his eyes, as if she held the key to regaining his control. "You've got 5 seconds to comply," he said, his voice low and menacing. "I'm not playing around." "Neither am I," Clarice replied, her calm a stark contrast to his unraveling. "And I'm not going to pretend I don't know what this is. You didn't stop me because of a report. You stopped me because of how I look, because of the way I walk, because I didn't bow my head when I saw your badge." Oh, how the crowd murmured in agreement, their voices a swell of support. A woman holding a toddler stepped forward, her eyes fierce. "She's speaking for a lot of us," she declared, her words a rallying cry. Strickland's radio crackled at his side, a faint buzz of static, but he ignored it, too entrenched in this battle to back out gracefully. He was committed to a course of action that, moment by moment, was stripping away everything he thought made him powerful. Clarice continued, her voice level, steady, unyielding. "You keep asking me to prove who I am," she said, "but the question isn't who I am. It's who you are, and what kind of man feels threatened by a woman holding a book." A few people laughed quietly, not out of humor, but because the truth was so absurdly, painfully clear. Then a sharp voice rang out from the crowd's edge, cutting through the noise. "You're on live stream, officer," it declared. "Thousands are watching now. You sure you want to keep going?" Strickland flinched, just enough for Clarice to notice, his eyes darting to the phones, to the faces staring back, not with fear, but with expectation, waiting to see if he'd crumble or explode. "Keep recording," someone shouted, their voice loud and defiant. "Let's make sure the whole country sees this." And still Clarice stood, her feet planted like roots, her eyes locked on his. Her silence spoke volumes, louder than any words could. She was done defending herself. The burden was now his to explain, to justify, to make this look like anything other than the injustice it was. Strickland opened his mouth, then closed it, his resolve wavering. He stepped back half a foot, and for a fleeting moment, it seemed he might retreat. But the pride burning in his chest, the heat prickling his skin, and the countless cameras trained on him made that impossible. He'd cornered himself, trapped by his own actions. "All right," he barked, his voice rough with desperation. "You want to act like this is a game? Then we'll take it downtown. You can answer questions there." He reached for her wrist, his hand moving with reckless intent. "No!" Several voices cried out at once, a chorus of outrage. A woman darted forward, positioning herself slightly between them, her eyes blazing. "Don't touch her," she shouted. "You've got no right." Clarice didn't move, her voice now hard and cold as steel. "Go ahead," she said, her words a dare that reverberated through the crowd. "Arrest me in front of all these people. Then watch what happens next." Strickland froze, his hand hovering inches from her arm, caught in a moment where the power dynamic had flipped so completely that even he could feel it. One wrong move, and this wasn't just a viral video, it was a suspension, a lawsuit, a career-ending scandal waiting to explode. A man in a delivery uniform stepped forward, his voice steady and resolute. "You keep saying you're just doing your job," he called out, "but no one's buying that anymore. We see through you." Strickland spun on him, his face a mask of fury. "Stay out of it," he roared. I am in it, the man replied, unflinching. We all are, because we've seen this story too many times. It always ends with someone in cuffs who didn't do a damn thing wrong. The crowd's energy surged, their voices a unified force, demanding justice, demanding change. Clarice stood at the center, her presence a beacon, her resolve unshakable. What would happen next? The answer was coming, and it would shake the very foundations of this moment. Oh, can you feel the electricity in the air? Clarice Monroe's voice soared above the buzzing crowd, clear and unwavering, cutting through the chaos like a beacon of truth. You want to know who I am? Fine, she declared, her words ringing with a fierce pride.
I'm Clarice Monroe.
I've lived in Charleston longer than you've worn that badge, officer. I'm a business owner, a community volunteer, a mother, a wife. Strickland's face twisted, first confusion, then a dawning dread. He blinked, his bravado crumbling. Clarice stepped closer, not a hint of threat in her stance, but oh, how she commanded the moment. My husband, she continued, her voice steady as steel, is Chief Lionel Monroe. The silence that followed was deafening, absolute, as if the very air had been sucked from the street. Strickland's mouth fell open, just a fraction, his hand dropping limply to his side. Chief Monroe, he whispered, his voice barely a breath, lost in the weight of his mistake. Clarice nodded, her eyes locked on his, unyielding. Yes. And right now he's probably watching this from his office, wondering what on earth you thought you were doing. The silence shattered in an instant. Gasps, mutters, exclamations erupted like fireworks. Someone in the back let out a nervous laugh, while another voice, sharp with glee, called out, "Oh Lord, he's done. Done for." Clarice didn't move, didn't gloat, didn't need to. She stood there, poised as ever, her presence a pillar of strength. Strickland's face drained of color, his eyes darting wildly, searching for an escape from the nightmare he'd created. But it was too late, far too late. The truth was out, and oh, how it was about to change everything. Officer Strickland stood frozen, his hand still inches from Clarice's wrist, caught in a moment of utter disbelief. What could he say? Where could he look? His lips moved, but no words came, his once sharp confidence reduced to a hollow stammer. The woman he'd accused of theft, of deception, of being out of place, she was the wife of his commanding officer. The wife of the man who ran the entire Charleston Police Department, the one who issued his badge. The crowd fell silent for a heartbeat, then erupted into a low wave of shocked murmurs. Did she just say Chief Monroe? One voice gasped. No way, that's his wife, another exclaimed. Oh, he messed up bad, real bad. Clarice remained still, her face unreadable, a portrait of calm resolve. She didn't blink, didn't gloat, she didn't have to. Her name, her truth, had spoken louder than any shout could. Strickland backed away slowly, his face pale as a ghost, sweat beading at his hairline, glistening in the morning sun. His voice, once sharp and commanding, was now a pitiful stammer. I wasn't aware, he mumbled, grasping for words that wouldn't come. Clearly, Clarice cut in, her tone clipped and cool, slicing through his excuses like a blade. You weren't aware of a lot of things, were you? Before Strickland could fumble for an apology or scrape together some feeble excuse, a new sound rose above the crowd's murmurs, the unmistakable roar of an SUV accelerating, tires screeching as a black, department-issued vehicle screeched to a stop at the curb. The door flew open before the car had even settled, and there he was, Chief Lionel Monroe, stepping into the scene like a storm breaking. He emerged in full uniform, his captain's bars glinting under the late morning sun, a towering figure of authority. 6'2", broad-shouldered with salt and pepper hair cropped close, his expression left no room for doubt. This was not a man to be trifled with. Strickland took a step back, as if the very sight of Lionel struck him like a physical blow. The crowd parted instinctively, sensing something monumental had just entered their midst. The atmosphere shifted in an instant. It wasn't just tense anymore, it was electric, charged with the promise of reckoning. Lionel's eyes swept the street, taking in the phones raised high, the faces frozen mid-record, the bystanders caught in the gravity of the moment. But he didn't linger on the spectacle. His gaze found Clarice first, and for a fleeting second, the weight in his shoulders eased, a silent relief washing over him. She gave him a small nod, a quiet assurance that screamed, "I'm okay, but this isn't over." Then his eyes shifted to Strickland, and oh, what he saw there reignited a fire in his chest, a blaze of righteous fury. Officer Strickland, he said, his voice low, controlled, but heavy with authority, what exactly is going on here? Strickland opened his mouth, but nothing came out, his words choked by the weight of his own actions. I asked you a question, Lionel repeated, his tone sharper now, cutting through the morning air. Why are you detaining my wife? The word wife hit like a siren, echoing through the crowd, amplifying the moment's intensity. Everyone heard it. Some gasped. One man whispered, "This is going viral in 5 seconds flat." Strickland finally found his voice, but it wavered, weak and unsteady. She matched a description, sir, he stammered. A jewelry theft earlier this morning. I was just following up. Lionel's eyes narrowed. Did you see her commit a crime? He asked, his voice calm but piercing. Did you witness her do anything suspicious? No, sir, but she, Strickland faltered, grasping for justification. Did she run? Did she lie? Did she resist in any way other than asking you to respect her rights?
Lionel précède, relente.
Strickland's shoulders slumped. No, sir, he admitted, his voice barely audible. Then explain to me, Lionel said, his tone dropping to a chilling calm, how this justifies you putting your hand on your weapon and threatening to detain an unarmed woman carrying a book. Strickland's face burned red, his eyes darting to the ground. I didn't know who she was, he said quietly, as if that could salvage the moment. Lionel's tone turned icy, each word a dagger. So what? You thought she was just another black woman you could intimidate without consequence. The crowd collectively exhaled, a sharp, unified breath that cut through the morning like a blade. It was a moment so raw, so real, it felt like the world itself had paused to witness it. Strickland's face flushed deeper, a mix of shame and defiance. That's not what I meant, he started, but Lionel stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper yet devastating in its clarity. But that's exactly what you did, he said. In front of witnesses, in front of the community you swore to protect, you humiliated an innocent woman based on nothing but your own prejudice. And now you're realizing you picked the wrong one. Clarice stood to the side, watching silently, her expression unreadable but her presence undeniable. She didn't need to interrupt. Her words had already set the stage, and Lionel was now saying everything she hadn't needed to. Strickland opened his mouth again, desperate to salvage something, but Lionel cut him off, his voice firm and final. Let me be absolutely clear, my wife does not owe you her dignity, not her patience, not her compliance. You made a series of bad decisions, and now you're going to answer for them. The female officer who'd arrived earlier stood nearby, her face a mix of discomfort and quiet relief. She gave Lionel a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of the moment's gravity. You're dismissed, Lionel said to Strickland, his voice leaving no room for argument. Return to the precinct. I expect you in my office, without that badge, by the end of the hour. Yes, sir, Strickland mumbled, his voice barely a whisper, his defeat palpable. He turned to leave, but Lionel wasn't done. And officer, he called, pausing Strickland in his tracks, pray this is the worst of what you faced today, because this is far from over. Strickland nodded stiffly, his head bowed, his exit captured by dozens of phones, each lens a witness to his downfall. As the SUV pulled away, the crowd began to disperse, some slowly, some lingering to whisper, to process the seismic event they just witnessed. Clarice stepped forward to meet her husband, their hands finding each other in a quiet, grounding moment. Are you all right? Lionel asked, his voice soft with concern. She nodded, her eyes steady.
Infine.
He exhaled, glancing around at the fading crowd. I can't believe this happened. Not like this. Clarice looked at him, her gaze piercing. You can't? She asked, a faint challenge in her tone. He paused, then sighed. Okay, maybe I can. She squeezed his hand, her expression resolute. Then you know this isn't just about today. I do, he said, his voice firm. And I'll handle it. She nodded once, a partnership sealed. We will. Together. For a few precious seconds, the noise of the world faded away. It was just the two of them, man and wife, standing side by side as they had through decades of storms, this one no different, no less fierce. Behind them, a few onlookers lingered, some offering nods of respect, others wiping away quiet tears, some still holding phones, torn between celebrating the justice they'd witnessed and grieving that it had been necessary at all. Clarice turned to the crowd, offering a small wave, a gesture of gratitude, then looked at Lionel once more. "Let's go," she said, her voice steady but urgent. "There's still work to do." And with that they walked away, leaving behind a shattered illusion of safety and carrying with them the fire of something far greater than justice, the blazing, unquenchable fire of truth. For a long moment after Strickland vanished down the block, a heavy silence hung over the street, not an absence of sound, but a silence that hummed with shock, reflection, and something deeper, something undeniable. The crowd remained, phones still raised, but no one spoke. They were still processing, still reeling from what they'd just seen. A police officer, publicly and unapologetically shamed by his own chief, stripped of authority in front of the very people he thought he could control. Oh, what a moment! Clarice let out a quiet breath, her composure unshaken as Lionel squeezed her hand gently, his touch a tether in the storm. He stood there in his uniform, but in that moment, he was her husband first, her partner through every trial. And she? She wasn't just his wife anymore. She'd become a symbol, a beacon of something far bigger than either of them could have imagined when the day began. Slowly, the crowd began to clap. It wasn't loud or chaotic. It started with one woman, her hands trembling with emotion, then a man joined, then more, a spontaneous applause that felt less like celebration and more like affirmation, a thank you, a reckoning that resonated in every heart present. "Thank you, Chief," someone called out, their voice thick with gratitude. "That needed to happen." "You handled that with such class, ma'am," another said, their tone soft with empathy. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that." Clarice offered a small, reserved nod, her grace unwavering. Lionel acknowledged the crowd with a polite gesture, but he didn't bask in the attention. He leaned close to her, his voice low. "Let's get you out of here," he said, protective but resolute. They walked toward the waiting SUV, their steps steady, purposeful. Behind them, the crowd began to break apart, some returning to their errands, others calling friends or posting online, sharing the moment that had shaken them to their core. A few lingered, reluctant to let go, wanting to hold on to the weight of what they'd witnessed just a little longer before the world moved on. Inside the SUV, Clarice stared out the window, the city sliding past in a blur of familiar streets. "He never even checked my ID," she said softly, her voice tinged with disbelief. Lionel kept his eyes on the road, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. "Because it was never about the ID," he said, his tone heavy with truth. "It was about control." A pause hung between them, heavy with unspoken thoughts. "He wouldn't have treated me that way if he knew who I was," she added, her words quiet but piercing. Lionel's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing. "No," he said, "but that's the problem, isn't it? He shouldn't have treated anyone that way, regardless of who they are." The weight of that truth settled between them, a shared understanding of the deeper fight they were now part of. Back at the precinct, the ripple effects were already spreading like wildfire. Strickland's patrol car sat awkwardly in the lot, its engine still warm, a silent testament to his hasty retreat. Inside, whispers raced through the halls, officers huddling in small groups near break rooms, in dimly lit hallways, outside by the smoking bench. Some spoke in hushed tones, wary of being overheard. Others didn't bother lowering their voices, their words sharp with shock. "You see the footage?" one asked, wide-eyed. "He tried to cuff the chief's wife on King Street in broad daylight. Man's out of his damn mind." "He thought she was just some random lady," another said, shaking their head. "Even if she was, that doesn't excuse what he did. What was he thinking?" At the end of the corridor, Sergeant Maynard leaned against the wall near the locker room, arms crossed, his weathered face a map of experience. He'd been on the force for 25 years, seen lines crossed and consequences dodged, but this felt different, monumental. "Captain's going to tear him apart," someone muttered nearby, their voice low with anticipation. "No," Maynard said, his tone calm but certain he already did. "The rest? That's just paperwork." His words hung in the air, a quiet acknowledgement of the shift that had just begun. Inside Lionel's office, the door was closed, the room a fortress of focus. Files were stacked neatly on his desk, a notepad off to the side, but he wasn't writing, not yet. He sat there, staring at the blank space before him, processing the whirlwind of the morning. Part of him, the chief, was already sifting through protocol, internal policy, the steps that needed to be taken next. But another part, the man, the husband, was still on that sidewalk, hearing Clarice's voice rise above the chaos, seeing the disbelief etched on Strickland's face, feeling the cold burn of injustice sear down his spine. How had it come to this? How had his wife, his partner, been forced to defend her very existence in the city they both loved? Oh, how it stung Lionel's heart to think of the slights Clarice had endured over the years. She'd shared stories with him, those subtle jabs, invasive questions, eyes that lingered too long on her skin, judging her not for her character but for the color of it. He'd believed her, of course he had. How could he not trust the woman who'd stood by his side through every storm? But seeing it unfold before his very eyes, watching Officer Strickland stride into that moment with such casual, infuriating arrogance, oh, it shook him to his core. It wasn't just a moment, it was a revelation, a searing truth that burned through every layer of his resolve. How had it come to this? How had his wife, his partner, been forced to defend her existence in their beloved Charleston? A sharp knock on the door snapped him out of his thoughts, pulling him back to the present. He cleared his throat, steadying himself. "Come in," he called, his voice firm despite the turmoil within. The door creaked open, and there stood Deputy Chief Alma Brooks, a rock in the turbulent sea of the department, one of the few Lionel trusted without a shred of doubt. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes? Oh, they carried the weight of knowing. "Can I speak freely?" she asked, her tone measured but urgent. "Always," Lionel replied, leaning forward, ready for whatever she'd bring. She closed the door with a soft click and sat across from him, her posture straight, her gaze unwavering. "We have a situation," she said, her words heavy with implication. "I know," Lionel responded, his voice low but resolute. "I mean bigger than Strickland," Alma pressed, leaning in. "The footage is everywhere. It's on every major social platform, being reshared by community activists, even local politicians. People are watching us closely, too closely." Lionel nodded slowly, his mind racing. "They should be," he declared, his conviction unshaken. Alma didn't blink, her eyes boring into his. "They're not just watching you, Lionel. They're watching all of us." "I'm aware," he said, his tone steady but tinged with the weight of responsibility. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Then you need to decide how deep this goes. Because the moment you made that public, it stopped being about just him." Lionel glanced at the file on his desk, its edges worn from countless reviews, then met her gaze again. "It was never just about him," he said, his voice firm, resolute. "He's a symptom of something we've let fester too long." "Then what's your next move?" Alma asked, her question hanging in the air like a challenge. He took a long, deep breath, steadying the fire within. "Internal review, full transparency," he announced, his words ringing with purpose. "We bring in an outside consultant. I want Strickland investigated, not just for today, but for every complaint ever filed against him. I want to know if there were patterns, if others saw it and looked away. I want names, Alma." She nodded once, a spark of respect in her eyes. "You're going to ruffle a lot of feathers," she warned, her voice tinged with caution. Lionel met her gaze without a hint of hesitation. "Let them be ruffled," he shot back. "If feathers need ruffling to get to the truth, so be it." She stood, her posture resolute. "Then let's get to work," she said, and with that she left, the door closing softly behind her. Lionel sank back in his chair, closing his eyes for a moment, letting the weight of the day settle. In his mind, Clarice's voice echoed from that sidewalk, her words sharp and clear. "You didn't stop me because of a report. You stopped me because of how I look." Oh, how those words cut. He opened his eyes, his resolve hardening. This wasn't just about what had happened, it was about what they'd allowed to happen, what the badge, the department, the entire system had permitted through years of silence. No more. It was time to break that silence, to let the truth roar. Out in the city, the footage spread like wildfire, blazing across screens and hearts alike. Dozens of versions circulated, each from a different angle, some set to stirring music, others captioned with cries for justice. Police chief confronts racist officer. Wife of Charleston chief stands up to harassment. Justice finally. Clarice hadn't asked to be the face of this moment, but oh, how it had chosen her. As the videos multiplied and public conversations deepened, one thing became crystal clear: this wasn't just a story about a mistake. It was a mirror, held up to the entire city, demanding that everyone really look, at the reflection of their reality. The next morning, Charleston woke to a different air, not in the weather but in something intangible, a hum beneath the surface that you could feel more than see. Everywhere, from gas stations to barbershops, from park benches to office kitchens, people were talking. They buzzed about the video, about the woman in pearls who stood her ground with unshakable grace, about the officer who was called out and dismantled by the police chief himself, about the staggering truth that she wasn't just anybody, she was somebody. She was his wife. Can you imagine the shock, the awe, the pride that rippled through those conversations? By noon, the footage had leaped from local news to national broadcasts, a blazing testament to the moment's power. The clip of Chief Monroe confronting Officer Strickland went viral on Twitter, shared and reshared with fervor. Civil rights pages amplified it, their captions bold. This is what accountability looks like. Conservative commentators grumbled, criticizing the chief for publicly shaming one of his own, but most people? Oh, most people felt something rare, something they hadn't felt in a long time when it came to police encounters and public power. They felt seen. They felt heard, as if the veil had been lifted, and the truth was finally breaking through. Clarice sat on the edge of their bed, her laptop open, scrolling through headlines that seemed to multiply by the minute. Her face was calm, but Lionel knew that look. It wasn't just calm, it was measured, focused, a mind already planning the next step. She wasn't merely processing this whirlwind, she was preparing to shape it. He stood in the doorway, still in his uniform, sipping his coffee slowly, watching her with a mix of pride and concern. "They're calling you the Rosa Parks of Charleston," he said, a hint of a smile in his voice. She looked up, her eyes sharp. "Cute," she replied, her tone dry but warm. "Some are calling for your statue," he added, testing her reaction. She arched an eyebrow, a playful challenge in her gaze. "Don't joke." "I'm not," he insisted, his smile widening. "There's a petition, Clarice." She closed the laptop with a sigh, setting it beside her, the weight of the moment settling in. "Lionel, I didn't ask for this," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "I know," he replied, crossing the room to sit beside her, his presence a quiet anchor. "But it asked for you, didn't it?" She let his words linger, her mind turning them over before she spoke. "You know this isn't going to stay about Strickland," she said, her tone heavy with foresight. He nodded, his expression grave. "It already hasn't," he agreed. "They're going to come after us, the department, the union, the city council, everyone with something to lose if the system changes." He looked at her, his eyes searching. "Are you ready for that?" She met his gaze, unflinching. "Are you?" They sat in silence for a long moment, the world outside their home buzzing with its usual rhythm, traffic humming, voices chattering, dogs barking in the distance. But inside, everything felt still, a sacred pause before the next chapter. "I want to speak," Clarice said finally, her voice firm with purpose. "Publicly." Lionel didn't move, his eyes studying her. "You sure?" he asked, knowing her answer but needing to hear it. "I'm sure," she declared, her resolve unshakable. "It can't just be you facing this, Lionel. I won't let them turn this into a whisper campaign, letting rumors twist the truth. If I stay quiet, they'll rewrite what happened, call it an overreaction, make me a footnote in someone else's story. I won't let that happen, not now, not ever." He exhaled slowly, his admiration for her burning bright. "Then say what you need to say," he said, his voice a vow of support. By that afternoon, Clarice sat across from a local news anchor at WCHS, Charleston's leading station, the camera lights hot and unforgiving. The studio smelled faintly of dust and stale coffee, but Clarice? Oh, she was unbothered, her presence commanding. Her voice didn't shake, her eyes didn't waver. She spoke with the clarity of someone who'd waited far too long to be heard. "I didn't speak up because I'm the chief's wife," she said, her words ringing with truth. "I spoke up because I'm tired. Tired of watching people who look like me be questioned, disrespected, dismissed just for existing in this world." The anchor, a young black woman named Kendra Lee, leaned in slightly, her eyes alight with respect. "What was going through your mind when it happened?" she asked, her voice soft but probing. Clarice smiled faintly, a spark of defiance in her gaze. "Which part?" she countered. "The accusation? The crowd rallying behind me? Or the moment I had to remind a police officer that I wasn't just a black woman with a necklace, I was a human being with rights?" Oh, how her words landed, each one a spark igniting hearts across the city. The segment aired during prime time, and the station switchboards lit up like a fireworks show. Comments flooded in, some furious spitting venom, asterisk this is race baiting. She played the victim. Asterisk but others overflowed with gratitude, asterisk she said what so many of us feel. Her grace under pressure was powerful. Asterisk. The interview was clipped, shared and reshared online, spreading like a tidal wave. People who'd never heard of Clarice Monroe suddenly felt like they knew her, like she'd spoken directly to their souls, giving voice to their silent struggles. Meanwhile, back at the precinct, Lionel was caught in a different kind of storm, a tempest of duty and defiance. He'd called an emergency leadership meeting, gathering his captains and senior officers in a conference room thick with tension. Stiff uniforms, crossed arms, clenched jaws, the air was heavy with unease. A few nodded respectfully as he entered, but others barely looked up, their silence a quiet rebellion. "You've all seen the footage," Lionel began, his voice steady but commanding. "You've all seen the news. Let's not pretend we can ignore this." One of the older captains, Wallace Briggs, cleared his throat, his tone laced with challenge. "Sir, with all due respect, you called out one of your own in front of civilians, cameras, and half the damn city." "I did," Lionel said evenly, unflinching. "Because one of my own crossed a line that should have never been crossed." Briggs leaned forward, his voice rising. "There's a process for that, internal discipline, private hearings. You made it political." "No," Lionel shot back, his voice sharpening like a blade. He made it political when he decided he could profile someone based on their skin. He made it public the moment he chose to escalate instead of assess. A younger lieutenant, Moreno, spoke next, his voice cautious but earnest. "Sir, you know we support justice. Most of us do, but this is tearing the department in half. People are choosing sides." "Good," Lionel declared, his eyes blazing. "It's time they did." The room stiffened, the air crackling with unease. "I know some of you are uncomfortable," he continued, his voice steady but unrelenting. "I know you're angry, maybe even feel betrayed. Maybe you think I embarrassed the department. But if your sense of unity is rooted in protecting bad behavior, then we're not united at all, we're just complicit." Briggs scoffed, his face tight with defiance. "So what now? You want to launch a witch hunt?" Lionel locked eyes with him, unyielding. "I want a full internal audit of all excessive force complaints from the past 5 years, he announced, his voice ringing with purpose. "I want the names of officers with 3 or more civilian reports, formal or informal. I want to know what's been swept under the rug, and I want to know who did the sweeping." Briggs leaned back, his jaw tight. "You're going to burn this place down," he muttered. Lionel didn't flinch. "Then maybe it's time for a controlled burn," he shot back, his words a promise of change. The meeting ended in a tense, heavy silence, the officers filing out with mixed emotions, some with heads bowed, others with a new fire in their steps. Back at home, Clarice sat in the living room, a notebook in her lap, her pen moving swiftly as she outlined ideas for a town hall meeting. She wasn't content to let this moment fade. She wanted to gather residents, faith leaders, business owners, youth advocates, not just to react, but to respond, to build something lasting. This wasn't about a fleeting spark, she was after momentum, a movement that would endure. When Lionel returned home that night, weary and disheartened but resolute, she handed him the notebook, her eyes alight with purpose. "This isn't just about what we tear down," she said, her voice steady but passionate. "It's about what we build next." He nodded slowly, flipping through her notes, each word a testament to her vision. "You always did think 10 steps ahead," he said, a faint smile breaking through his fatigue. She grinned, a spark of playfulness in her eyes. "I had to. You were always playing catch-up." He laughed quietly, the sound a balm to their shared burden, then pulled her into a gentle hug. For a moment they stood there, wrapped in each other's strength, letting the silence settle, not a heavy silence, but one brimming with possibility, purpose, and a shared pain that forged their deeper resolve. They were 2 people, yes, but now they carried the voices of many, and oh, the fight was far from over. But finally, gloriously, it had begun. Inside the Charleston Police Department, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Gone was the easy camaraderie, the morning jokes in the locker room, the quiet coffee shared in the briefing room, the light-hearted banter at shift change. In its place were cautious glances, whispered conversations, and a palpable tension that hung like a storm cloud. Loyalty lines were being redrawn with every passing hour, You were either with Chief Monroe or you weren't, and everyone felt the weight of that choice. Some officers rallied behind him, their voices fervent, calling it a long overdue reckoning, praising leadership for finally standing firm on accountability. Others, though, bristled with resentment, not just because one of their own had been called out publicly, but because the old, untouchable fraternity, the sacred code of silence, was cracking under the pressure of truth. Oh, what a time to be in Charleston, where every moment felt like a step toward justice or a battle for the soul of the city. Can you feel the tension simmering in the air? In the back of the Charleston Police Department precinct, Officer Greg Kowalski leaned against a humming vending machine, his arms crossed tightly, his face etched with frustration. A small group of officers huddled around him, their voices low but sharp with unease. "You hear he's going through all our complaints now," one muttered, disbelief lacing his words. 5 years' worth, digging up stuff most departments wouldn't even bother to document. What's he trying to prove? Kowalski shook his head, his tone bitter as bile. This whole thing's political, pure and simple. You really think he'd be doing any of this if it wasn't his wife? Come on, let's be real. Another officer, his voice quieter, almost hesitant, added, "Strickland crossed the line, sure, but he got unlucky." Kowalski snapped, his eyes flashing. That's the difference. Don't think for a second the rest of us haven't done something similar and walked away clean. Now we're all targets, every single one of us. Captain Lionel Monroe felt the divide growing, a chasm widening by the hour. Oh, how it weighed on him. He sensed it in the stiff silences during briefings, in the way some officers avoided his gaze, their eyes darting away as if his presence burned. Others fell silent the moment he entered a room, their conversations cut off like a switch. But did he back down? Not for a second. Every time he walked through the department now, he carried a thick folder in his hand, brimming with data, flagged complaints, and internal HR notes, a bold signal that the work had begun, that no truth would stay hidden. This wasn't just a job, it was a mission, a reckoning. Yet the pushback was sharpening its claws. That Thursday evening, Lionel trudged home later than usual, his shoulders heavy with the day's battles. Clarice was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner, the soft strains of a jazz record spinning in the background, filling the air with a fleeting sense of calm. She flashed him a warm smile as he walked in, but oh, how quickly it faded. The moment she saw the storm in his eyes, her expression shifted to concern. "What happened?" she asked, her voice soft but urgent, the knife pausing mid-slice. He set his keys down slowly, each movement deliberate, as if delaying the weight of his words. "There was a note on my desk," he said, his voice low, strained. "No envelope, just one sentence. Back off or we'll bury you with him." Clarice stopped slicing, the knife clattering softly against the cutting board. "Who do you think left it?" she asked, her eyes searching his. "I don't know yet," he admitted, running a weary hand through his hair. "It wasn't signed. Nothing on the cameras, no prints. I've already asked IT to pull badge access logs, but," he trailed off, the uncertainty gnawing at him. Clarice wiped her hands on a towel, turning to face him fully, her gaze steady but heavy. "This is only going to get uglier, isn't it?" she asked, her voice tinged with a weary resolve. "It might," Lionel said, his honesty raw. "We're stirring up things people were comfortable leaving buried, things they wanted buried." Later that night, as Clarice climbed the stairs to their bedroom, her phone buzzed with a sharp, intrusive sound. A text from an unknown number glowed on the screen. Asterisk careful, Mrs. Monroe. "You're not as untouchable as you think." Asterisk her breath caught, but she didn't hesitate. She marched downstairs and handed the phone to Lionel without a word, her silence louder than any scream. His jaw clenched as he read the message, then read it again, his eyes narrowing with a mix of anger and determination. "We need to start documenting everything," he said, his voice firm, unyielding. "Every message, every threat, we report it all." "They're trying to scare us," Clarice said quietly, her tone steady but laced with exhaustion. "They want us to second-guess, to hesitate." "I won't," Lionel declared, his eyes locking with hers. "And I know you won't either." "I'm not afraid," she said, her voice resolute, "but I am tired. And I hate what this is bringing out in people." He nodded, pulling her gently into his arms, their shared strength a fortress against the storm. "So do I," he murmured, his voice a vow. The next day, Clarice's instincts prickled as she drove to meet a community leader downtown. Twice, she spotted the same dark sedan in her rearview mirror, its presence too deliberate to ignore. Her heart raced. Coincidence or something more? She turned early, taking a detour through a gas station, her eyes flicking to the mirror. The car slowed, then continued on, vanishing into traffic. Nothing happened, but oh, how she felt it. The unseen eyes, the silent message. That evening, Lionel found one of their porch lights smashed, its glass scattered like a warning. Their mailbox hung open, a single sheet of blank paper inside, its emptiness a chilling threat. These were subtle, yes, but real, deeply personal, meant to unnerve. Did they waver? Never. At the precinct, the atmosphere grew darker still. Anonymous notes began appearing in break rooms, their words venomous, dripping with resentment. A copy of the news article about Clarice's TV interview was taped inside a stall in the men's locker room, defaced with crude comments scrawled in Sharpie, each word a stab at her dignity. Someone had scribbled "Queen Monroe doesn't speak for all of us" across a dry erase board in the staff room, the letters bold and defiant. Even some officers who'd initially supported Lionel's actions were starting to keep their heads down, wary of the growing rift. The department was fracturing, its cracks widening with every passing day, and Lionel felt it in his bones, every tense glance, every whispered grudge. But retreat? That wasn't in their blood. "We didn't start this fire," Clarice told him one night, curled beside him on the couch, her voice a mix of weariness and fire. "But maybe it's time we stop putting it out." He looked at her, exhausted but resolute, his heart swelling with admiration. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" he asked, a spark of hope in his eyes. She nodded, her gaze fierce. "We take this to the people. Town hall bigger," she declared. "A public forum. Let them see us, hear us, know the truth. Not the rumors, not the politics, the raw, unfiltered truth." He smiled softly, despite the weight of it all. "You really are unstoppable, aren't you?" She leaned her head on his shoulder, a quiet strength in her touch. "And you're finally catching up," she teased, her voice a balm to their shared burden. The town square was alive, pulsing with energy. What began as a quiet conversation between Clarice and a few community leaders had exploded into something massive, organic, urgent, undeniably real. Flyers had spread like wildfire across churches and community centers. Local activists made calls, posted online, rallied old friends and new allies. They'd expected 100 people under the ancient oak trees, but nearly 1,000 showed up. Young and old, black and white, residents from every corner of Charleston, united in purpose. They came with signs that shouted their truth: "Dignity is not a crime. Justice for Clarice. We are watching." Some brought folding chairs and coolers, others their kids, holding tiny hands as if this too was a lesson in voice, in courage, in standing tall against injustice. On the makeshift stage at the plaza's heart, Clarice stood beside Maya Bell, a civil rights warrior whose weathered voice carried the wisdom of decades. To Maya, this moment felt different, electric, a movement with a face, a name, a story that could rally hearts. "I've stood in protest lines since 1963, Maya said into the microphone, her voice steady, seasoned by years of struggle.
"Ive marcht in Rhin, in fear, in hope."
"And I'm standing here today because what happened to Clarice Monroe didn't just happen to her. It happened to every one of us who's ever been told they don't belong. It happened to every child taught to lower their voice to stay safe. Today, we're saying enough." The crowd roared with applause, not just for Maya but for the spirit of her words, echoing off buildings, rolling down streets like a drumbeat of defiance. Clarice stepped to the mic, taking a deep breath as the crowd hushed, their eyes fixed on her. "I didn't plan to be standing here," she began, her voice clear and resonant. "But life rarely goes according to plan, does it?" A few soft chuckles rippled through the front row, a moment of shared humanity. "I was walking, that's all. Just walking, holding a book, wearing a necklace I've worn every year since my 20th anniversary. And somehow, that was enough for someone in a uniform to decide I was suspicious." Her words hung in the air, raw and real. She paused, her voice steady but thick with emotion, each word a testament to her strength. "That officer didn't ask me where I was going. He demanded I prove I belong. And when I refused to surrender my dignity, he tried to take it by force." A long silence followed, the crowd still, leaning in, hanging on her every word. "I'm not angry for myself," Clarice continued, her voice rising with purpose. "I'm angry because we all know I'm not the first, and unless something changes, I won't be the last. So I'm standing here today, Not as the police chief's wife, not as a headline, not as someone who went viral on a Tuesday afternoon. I'm here as a woman, a neighbor, a citizen of this city we all love, and I'm asking, how much longer do we accept this? How many more apologies before we demand accountability? A man near the front shouted, "No more!" And others joined, their voices a chorus, "No more. Not again. We've had enough." Clarice nodded, her eyes blazing. "Then let's do something about it," she urged, her words a call to action. Her speech wasn't just rhetoric, she came prepared. Alongside Maya and a team of local organizers, Clarice unveiled a list of demands, bold calls for systemic reform, a formal review board with civilian oversight, body camera transparency, a whistleblower protection program within the department, mandatory de-escalation training, public access to complaint records against officers. "We're not asking for favors," she declared, her voice ringing out. "We're demanding change." The crowd erupted in applause, longer and deeper this time, a wave of unity that shook the plaza. This wasn't about one woman and one officer anymore, it was a community movement, alive and unstoppable. Lionel stood just behind the stage, watching with quiet pride, his heart swelling. He wasn't in uniform today, opting for a simple button-down shirt, sleeves rolled up, his badge tucked away. He wasn't here as Chief Monroe, he was Clarice's husband, a man learning, still learning, what it meant to lead by standing beside someone rather than in front. Maya handed him the microphone, and the crowd hushed, their anticipation palpable. He stepped forward, his presence steady, grounded. "My wife said most of what needs to be said," he began, his voice warm but resolute. "But I'd like to speak as your public servant." He paused, gathering his thoughts, his eyes scanning the sea of faces. "I've worn this badge for 23 years. I've buried friends in the line of duty, sworn to protect and serve this city with everything I have. But lately, I've had to ask myself, protect and serve who? Because if we're not protecting people like Clarice, people who do everything right and still face handcuffs or worse, then we're failing plain and simple." The crowd murmured in agreement, some nodding, others wiping away quiet tears, moved by his honesty. "I've been part of a system that's too often rewarded silence," he continued, his voice steady but fierce. "A system that values loyalty over truth, that tolerates misconduct because holding people accountable makes folks uncomfortable. Well, I'm done worrying about comfort. This is Charleston, and this city doesn't move forward on silence." He held up a folder, its weight a symbol of his resolve. "As of this week, I've launched a full audit of internal complaints, excessive force reports, and officer histories. I don't care how long someone's been on the force, if they've harmed the public trust, they will answer for it." The applause was thunderous, laced with whistles and standing ovations, a roar of support that echoed through the square. People on the edges raised their phones, live streaming every second, ensuring the world saw Charleston stand. After the speeches, Clarice wove through the crowd, hugging old friends, shaking hands with strangers, posing for photos with young girls who whispered, "You're so brave," as if sharing a sacred secret. A group of high school students from a local civics club handed her a petition, their eyes bright with hope. "Over 5,000 signatures in 48 hours, one told her. "People are listening, Mrs. Monroe. We just needed someone to start talking." By sunset, as the crowd slowly dispersed, Maya slipped her arm around Clarice's shoulders, her voice soft but profound. "You didn't just change the story," she said, her eyes warm with pride. "You gave us a new chapter, a new beginning." Clarice looked across the plaza, at the signs still waving in the fading light, at the candles flickering for a peaceful vigil, at the young mothers pushing strollers and grandfathers in lawn chairs, all united. "Let's make sure it lasts," she said, her voice resolute. "This time, let's make it count." The air inside the courtroom was thick with tension, a pressure you could feel in your bones. Cameras lined the back wall, their flashes punctuating the heavy silence like lightning. Every seat was filled, reporters scribbling notes, residents holding their breath, off-duty officers shifting uncomfortably, activists with fire in their eyes, students, clergy. The people of Charleston had shown up, their presence a testament to the moment's weight. At the plaintiff's table sat Clarice Monroe, dressed in a tailored navy suit, her shoulders back, her eyes forward, a picture of unyielding strength. Beside her, Lionel sat in a matching gray jacket, his badge absent today, his wedding ring catching the fluorescent light, a quiet symbol of their unbreakable bond. "Oh, can you feel the electric tension pulsing through that Charleston courtroom?" Across the aisle sat Officer Brett Strickland, a diminished figure compared to the brazen man who'd confronted Clarice Monroe on that fateful spring morning on King Street. The smugness that once defined his sneer had vanished, replaced by a cold, fragile shadow of his former self, as if the weight of his actions had finally crushed his bravado. His lawyer leaned over every so often, whispering urgent words of strategy, but Strickland? He didn't respond, didn't even twitch. His jaw was locked tight, his eyes fixed unblinkingly on the desk before him, staring into a void of his own making. What must have been racing through his mind, facing the consequences of that day? The trial had stretched over 3 grueling days, each moment a battle for truth and justice. Witnesses took the stand, their voices steady and resolute, recounting the events with unwavering clarity. Video evidence was replayed, frame by frame, exposing every detail of that confrontation on King Street, each second a damning testament to Strickland's overreach. Internal department files were laid bare, entered into the record like a ledger of hidden sins, revealing a troubling history. Community members who'd stood witness to Clarice's ordeal were consistent, their testimonies a unified chorus. She had done nothing wrong, not a single misstep. Former officers who'd worked alongside Strickland painted a darker picture, unveiling a pattern of prior complaints, informal warnings brushed aside, and moments of misconduct swept under the rug like dust in a forgotten corner. One by one, their words wove a narrative, not of a single bad day, but of a broken culture, rotten at its core. Can you imagine the weight of that revelation, peeling back layers of silence to expose the truth? When the jury returned with their verdict, unanimous, declaring Strickland liable for misconduct, abuse of authority, and violation of civil rights, the courtroom erupted in a wave of emotion. Quiet gasps gave way to applause, a swell of triumph that echoed off the walls. The judge pounded his gavel, demanding silence, but oh, how that moment refused to be contained. It was as if the very air vibrated with the power of justice served. Strickland's face turned ashen, pale as the truth laid bare, as the verdict was read aloud, each word a hammer striking his pride, shattering the illusion of his untouchability. Clarice, seated at the plaintiff's table, didn't smile, didn't cheer. Her strength was deeper than that. She simply closed her eyes, letting out a slow, measured breath, a silent acknowledgement of the battle won. It was done. Justice had spoken, and its voice was resounding. Outside the courthouse, Clarice and Lionel stepped into a sea of supporters, their cheers a roaring tide of solidarity that could have shaken the heavens. Signs waved high above the crowd, * justice for Clar. Ice. Dignity is not a crime. We stand with you. *, each one a vibrant banner of hope, of triumph, of a community refusing to let this moment fade. The energy was electric, a pulsating wave of gratitude and resolve, as voices called out thanks to Clarice for her courage, for standing tall when the world tried to push her down. She and Lionel stood side by side, their hands clasped tightly, their presence a beacon for all who'd gathered. Can you picture it? The sheer power of that moment, a city united, their hearts beating as one, vowing to carry this victory forward. The crowd's chants filled the air, a symphony of support that seemed to lift Clarice and Lionel higher, their resolve unshaken despite the trials they'd faced. Supporters of all ages pressed close, some offering tearful hugs, others raising fists in solidarity, their signs swaying like flags of a new dawn. You showed them, Clarice, one woman shouted, her voice thick with emotion. You showed them what strength looks like. A young man, barely out of his teens, held up a sign reading "We are watching," his eyes bright with hope. This isn't just about you, it's about all of us, he called, and the crowd roared in agreement, their applause a thunderclap of unity. Oh, how the scene must have felt like a turning point, a moment where the tides of change surged forward, unstoppable. Clarice's heart swelled as she took it all in, her eyes scanning the faces before her, old friends, strangers turned allies, children clutching their parents' hands, all drawn together by her stand. Lionel squeezed her hand, his gaze steady, a silent promise that they were in this together, as they'd always been. We did it, he whispered, his voice soft but heavy with pride. No, she replied, her eyes shining with determination, we're just getting started. And oh, how true that was. This victory wasn't the end, it was a spark, a flame that would light the way for the work still to come, for the reforms they'd fight for the justice they'd demand. The supporters pressed closer, their voices a chorus of encouragement, some shouting words of thanks, others sharing stories of their own encounters with injustice, inspired by Clarice's courage to speak their truth. A grandmother, her hair silver and her eyes fierce, clasped Clarice's hands, tears streaming down her face. "I've waited my whole life to see someone stand up like you did," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "You've given us hope." Clarice nodded, her own eyes glistening, but her resolve unshaken. "We're going to keep fighting," she promised, her voice steady, a vow to all who stood with her. Can you imagine the power of that exchange, the connection forged in shared struggle, in shared triumph? As the crowd began to disperse, some lingering to capture final photos or share final words, the weight of the moment settled over Clarice and Lionel like a mantle. They stood together, watching the signs sway in the breeze, the supporters' voices fading into the evening air. This wasn't just a personal victory, it was a clarion call, a demand for change that echoed far beyond the courthouse steps. The road ahead would be long, fraught with challenges, but oh how they were ready. Clarice's breath caught as she thought of the work still to come, the reforms they'd push for, the systems they'd challenge. "We've got a lot to do," she said, her voice quiet but fierce. Lionel nodded, his grip on her hand tightening. "And we'll do it together," he replied, his words a pledge, a promise to stand by her side through every battle. The memory of that spring morning on King Street lingered in their minds, a vivid reminder of how this all began. That day, under the Charleston sun, Clarice had walked with purpose, her pearl necklace gleaming, her package, a gift for Lionel, tucked under her arm. She'd been stopped, accused, challenged, but she'd stood her ground, her voice a beacon of truth that had sparked this movement. Now, outside the courthouse, surrounded by a community that believed in her, she felt the weight of that moment anew, its power undimmed. How could it ever fade, when it had ignited such a fire? The supporters' signs, their cheers, their tears, they were all proof that her stand had mattered, that it had changed something fundamental in the heart of Charleston. As the last of the crowd drifted away, Clarice and Lionel turned to face each other, their eyes meeting in a moment of quiet understanding. The trial was over, the verdict delivered, but the fight? Oh, it was far from finished. They knew the challenges ahead, the pushback, the threats, the systems that resisted change, but they also knew the strength they carried, the strength of a community behind them, the strength of their shared purpose. "This is bigger than us," Clarice said, her voice soft but resolute. "It always was," Lionel replied, his eyes shining with pride. And with that, they stepped forward, ready to carry the flame of justice into the future, their hearts alight with the promise of a better tomorrow. Oh, what a powerful testament to courage and justice Clarice Monroe's story is. My heart swells with admiration for her unyielding spirit, standing tall against prejudice on that Charleston street, her voice a clarion call for dignity. The raw emotion of her defiance, facing Officer Strickland's baseless accusations with unwavering resolve, stirs something deep within me. It's a reminder of how one person's stand can ignite a movement, how a single moment can ripple through a community, demanding change. Clarice's grace under pressure, her refusal to let injustice define her, is nothing short of inspiring. She didn't just defend herself, she defended every soul who's ever been judged for their skin rather than their character. How profound is that? The courtroom scene, with its electric tension and triumphant verdict, brought tears to my eyes. The applause, the supporters' signs, the unity, it's a vivid picture of hope, of a city rallying behind truth. Lionel's steadfast support, standing as her partner in this fight, underscores the power of love and solidarity. Yet, I feel a pang of sorrow that such a stand was necessary, that Clarice had to endure harassment in her own city. It's a stark reminder that the fight for equality is far from over. But oh, how Clarice's victory fuels my belief in progress. Her story is a beacon, urging us to confront injustice head-on, to amplify the voiceless, and to build a world where no one is questioned for simply existing. I'm moved by her resilience, her refusal to be silenced, and I'm left with a burning hope that her legacy will inspire generations to keep pushing for justice, no matter the cost.